Welcome to Outside the Code, a show about the stories behind the professionals in the tech industry. I'm Alex from Tech Rally, and on the show today, we talk about Quincy Larson's mission of making web development accessible to anyone through his nonprofit organization, FreeCodeCamp. Too often, we only see the end product. FreeCodeCamp is a household name for both new and experienced engineers. But what if I told you that Quincy had to go through multiple failures to eventually find a product that clicked? Join me in my conversation with Quincy, where he shares his non-traditional software developer journey, why he started FreeCodeCamp, and what the future holds for him. Quincy, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. How's everything going with you, Alex?
It's going well. I see you're staying hydrated. Likewise here, I'm just drinking some orange juice instead.
Right on, yeah.
Did you know that you have a Wikipedia about you?
I think it got merged in. Did it get? I think it got merged into the FreeCodeCamp Wikipedia. Somebody created
really?
one for me, and then they're like, "This guy's only famous because of FreeCodeCamp," so they merged me in there.
No, you actually have a
Do I have a
Wikipedia.
standalone?
Yeah, you have a standalone if I remember correctly.
Huh.
Oh wait, maybe it disappeared. I
Yeah,
thought
I
you
think
had.
that they just they say like read Rex from Quincy Larson or something like that. Yeah.
I could have sworn I thought I saw like just a
It was for
dedicated
a
one.
while, but you know how Wikipedia is like they like not all the stuff on our Wikipedia page is accurate, and I have never attempted to update it because I've just heard that like the moment you try to do anything, if you're even, you know, ancillarily related to the project, then that's like a form of spam and it breaks their code of conduct.
I
So
see.
we just leave this alone, and it's like super duper out of date. And back in the day, it had like some weird story about the origins that was like completely fiction. But
Yeah, that's so funny because I actually looked at that Wikipedia and I was like, oh, these could be interesting questions to ask to see if it was true or not. But maybe we could like break some mystery folklore stories of the genesis of FreeCodeCamp
yeah, I mean,
in this
I can
interview.
just the story is not some big romantic affair. It's me sitting in my closet in San Francisco, which is the only space I had that was quiet for like a weekend, just like banging out some basic
Code.
code and shipping it and then tweeting about it. And then, as usual, nobody really cared. Then, like, somebody started caring, and then somebody submitted it to Hacker News, and some people submitted on subreddits. And yeah, the chat room started buzzing up. And then I was like, hey, everybody, welcome. Let's go together. And then people started making it through the curriculum. They started getting jobs. They started turning around and contributing to the code base. And it just kind of expanded out from there. I mean, it's just like luck. It's dumb luck. It's better to be lucky than good, as Napoleon used to say.
Right. Well, I mean, for those of us who might not have seen your Wikipedia page and don't know who you are and what you represent, like, do you want to just give us a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Quincy. I am a American. I grew up not too far from where I live now. I grew up in Oklahoma City. I live in Dallas, Texas, and I am a career teacher and school director. I worked as a school director in the U.S. and in China, and would manage teams of teachers and instructional staff and things like that. And when I was 31, I was trying to figure out how to like automate certain aspects of the school because I wanted my teachers to be able to spend more time with their students instead of doing back office stuff, grade reports, government compliance stuff. So I just figured out I figured out some basic scripts and Googled around and figured out how to like basically automate certain government forms where it would just click procedurally on like all the different forms and submit them, and figured out some Excel macros and things like that. So I was able to like, boom, suddenly we were like the most productive school in the system and most efficient. And like all these people were transferring in because it was just so stress free. And I was like, my gosh, like I'm just some 31-year-old dude who doesn't know anything about coding. How did this happen? So that led me to spend more time learning about programming and technology. And I spent like 9 months just immersing myself in free online resources and books and things like that, and hacking out at hacker spaces, doing a hackathon every weekend. And in the process of doing that, I was able to learn enough to get my first software engineering job. And then after doing that for a while, I was like, I want to help other people do this. Hence, FreeCodeCamp. It's a little bit messier, like with a lot of false starts and dead ends and things like that. But that's basically the gist of it.
Yeah, and just kind of rewinding back a little bit, back in your school director days, what was your philosophy in terms of just education then?
Yeah, well, I always saw the strength in experiential learning, learning by doing. And when you're teaching English, I mean, you can go to like most countries that are non-English speaking, and you can find lots of people that can read books and like know basic vocab and stuff, but they don't necessarily have the time and energy and the resources to be able to hang out with native speakers all the time and practice their English. So often their oral English will be stilted, or their written English will come across as like they're just not corresponding a lot. Using, they're not producing the language to the extent that is necessary to ultimately achieve mastery in it. And so they hire tutors, or they try to study abroad and things like that. And that's great because that gives them an opportunity to immerse themselves, immersion learning. Anybody who's studied a foreign language, not just English, but anybody who's studied a foreign language can probably tell you how much quicker they learned when they arrived in Japan or in France or wherever. And like suddenly they have to speak or sink, so to speak, like sink or swim. And like all of a sudden, like every single word in your dictionary is like very relevant and very applicable to your day-to-day interactions. And so that is very expensive and hard to reproduce in real life with natural language. But the great thing is when you're programming, computers are ubiquitous. You know, it's cheap. It's like unthinkably cheap to be able to just like interact with a computer, to like send some JavaScript their way and have them evaluate it and send back the results. So cheap, in fact, that like FreeCodeCamp, a tiny NGO, can help more than 1 million people a day that go and like just run some code and learn some interactive. So to get back to the answer to your question, like interactivity is like the key in my opinion. Like I absolutely think video tutorials are useful. Like when I'm eating or when I'm just relaxing and waiting for my kids to go down at the end of the day, like I call myself the warden. Basically, if the kids get out of bed, I have to like put them back and say, no, it's bedtime. Like I'll pull up like YouTube, or I'll watch some video lectures or something like that. It's really useful for that. But I think that at the end of the day, everybody actually needs to spend a lot of time coding if they want to really get good at software development. And so just in terms of like raw practice, like FreeCodeCamp has set out to, like, we took like the entire Project Euler uh, database of like 500 coding problems, and we're like, all right, let's get this to run in JavaScript. Now it runs in Rust too. We're gonna announce that soon, and soon we'll be able to like transpile it into Python and all these things. Rosetta Code is another big open source project. We wrote tests to go with it and like put it up, and just giving people a massive amount of interactive coding challenges where they can be like quickly running code within a few milliseconds, get some feedback as far as whether they're heading in the right direction. Oh, more tests are passing now, or oh, that test that was passing a minute ago isn't passing anymore. What did I do wrong? Or now I'm getting this error message. Super tight feedback loops. That's how people really start to accelerate. And I think that that's applicable in math. I think that is applicable in language acquisition. And I definitely think it's applicable in terms of just like understanding statistical concepts and data science concepts and things like that. So we're seeking to create these high verisimilitude simulacrums of real life software development so that people can plow through those and get just a ton of experiential learning in.
I totally agree with you. The idea of this immersive aspect. For me, when I go to Korea, I my Korean just gets significantly better, right? Because I'm around other Korean people. And if you're around other software engineers, you talk about code, even though you might not be writing all the code all the time, you're kind of interacting with other software developers and just learning from them, seeing what their little strategies or their little shortcuts are. But in your case, from my research, when you learned how to code, you kind of did it on your own. And I know that you use some MIT learning course platform, and you kind of mentioned the idea of being lonely, and it was somewhat of an ambiguous process, especially when you were doing like Project Euler problems. What did you feel at that moment? Did you feel that something was lacking, and somehow how did you get past that hurdle for you in your software dev journey?
Yeah, well, I was super grateful for the devs that were in my life. Like I was living in Santa Barbara, California at the time, and I would just go. We had this place called the Santa Barbara Hackerspace, so we'd go there. And on weekends, everybody would get together and they'd be showing off projects, and we do pair programming and stuff. And on weekends or weekdays, when everybody was work, I'd just go there just to be surrounded by that environment, breathing that air. I'm like, I'm in a hacker space, and kind of like remembering, like, oh, I was sitting in this couch and I was talking with this guy who had like 6 years of developer experience, and I remember what he was telling me here, and it kind of contextualized it. So there's a lot, potentially a lot of loneliness when you're going at your own and you don't have time to go back and get a CS degree, for example. Um, I think that real life in-person communities can provide a lot of that. I also think you can get a lot of that if you are able to join like an online community, and hang out in like a Discord or some sort of like forum, or do Zoom calls with your friends. By the way, if you hear kids in the background, I apologize.
No worries.
Um, so yeah, but when I was doing it, like first, there were some people that were learning the code, but it was still kind of like very much a question. It was not like a foregone conclusion, like, oh yeah, you're only like 30 years old. You can sit down and you can learn this stuff and you can go out and get a job. There was still some angst about like whether the ship had sailed and whether like, uh, you know, human minds were plastic enough to learn coding in their 30s. I mean, it seems outlandish today to say that, but that was still kind of like, I had a lot of self doubt, um, and a lot of imposter syndrome, even as a white male guy with glasses and a beard who totally fit in. Nobody ever walked up to me and said, "Oh, you don't look like you belong here." I didn't have to deal with any of that crap, but what I did have to deal with is when people presumed that I was like some senior engineer because I was a little older, and then I sat down and I could barely like code like a for loop. So it's like a kind of a revert, like a different type of problem, but not nearly as serious as the problems a lot of people face. But I don't mean to trivialize ageism or anything, but uh, I do believe it's something that can be overcome.
Right. And I know that you went to a lot of hackathons during your time. And I think you said 40 in 1 year. Is that true? Did you really go to 40 hackathons in 1 year? Is this over sensationalized? Wait, what? Sensationalized? Is that the right word?
I would go every single weekend for about a year. So if you think about it, like for 9 months, I was doing this almost every single week. Sometimes I'd do like two hackathons in a week.
Oh my God.
But like they'd be like a weekday, and then the weekend would be like the two-day things. I did a lot of like Startup Weekend is a great hackathon where you get exposure not only to like the software development side, but also design and like pitching, things like that. But yeah, like I lived in California and there was a hackathon every week. Like if you're willing to like drive, or I would just take the Caltrain, or not the Caltrain, but Amtrak, which Amtrak it's like if you actually arrive within 2 hours of the stated arrival time, great. So I would always have to rail in the night before and show up at like the hostel. And I did everything as cheaply as possible. Like I would just eat 7-Eleven pizza, and because I didn't know whether I was going to be able to get a job, and I didn't want to like drain my funds. My advice to people now would be like, don't quit your day job, just continue working. I quit my job because I had this like Viking burn the boats at the shores and figure out a way to make it happen, and maybe that did help. But I like to think that with Free Code Camp and everything the community is creating, along with other coding communities and like all these amazing creators on YouTube and other places, that there are more than enough resources to learn kind of on your lunch hour and at night, and weekends, without having to like put yourself in financial peril.
What was your goal with going to so many hackathons? Was it to learn? Was it potentially to meet other developers that could get you a job? Was it a bit of both? What was that goal that would drive you to go to so many hackathons, maybe sometimes twice a week, as you mentioned?
Yeah, it was very much. I had this theory, and keep in mind, like I had already been fairly successful in school directing and managing to convince people to give me responsibility that I was probably wholly out of my depth on, right? So I was like, all right, like the three things that matter: the skills, the reputation, and the network. And so by going to these hackathons, I was building up the skills. Like every weekend was a new kind of tribulation. And I was also building up the network, meeting people in all these different cities. And of course, my reputation, like I did win a couple of hackathons. And that was something I could point to, like winner, Quincy Larson, winner of this random hackathon that happened several weeks ago. Like it mattered, and also I had this portfolio of projects I could talk about, like, oh yeah, we built this type of project at this hackathon. So it's very much just project oriented learning, and I won one of these hackathons. We got like $2,000, and like that was like a ton of money. Like I'm an educator. I think like I was basically at the peak of my field, living in California, mind you, and making
Mm-hmm.
about 60,000 US dollars a year, which for me was just like all my teacher friends were envious, like, oh my gosh, because they're like back in Oklahoma making like 30,000, 40,000,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So $2,000, that was like 2 weeks worth of wages, right? So it was a big
Right.
deal to me.
Eventually you did find a job from these experiences and everything. When you got your first job, what was the goal for Quincy Larson at that time? Because I'm pretty sure you weren't really thinking about Free Code Camp. It was probably just get a software developer job. But
Oh
then
yeah,
did you
don't
want to just
blow it.
become this senior developer? Did you want to become a principal? Like, was the goal to just go up this career ladder, or did you still have this kind of entrepreneurial spirit of possibly starting your own thing with the skill sets that you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, like I wanted to learn the skills so I could turn around and apply them. Like I knew there have been several periods in my life when I've just felt like pretty comfortable. Like
Mm-hmm.
for example, and I think that's just because like I'm like kind of like a just like an Oklahoma boy at heart. Like I was like, wow, I can just chill and play video games and work at Taco Bell, and it's not that big of a deal. Like there were several times where I was just like, I can stop here. I've reached the top of this mountain. But if you're trying to climb the highest mountain around, a lot of times you got to look around, and when you get to the top of one mountain, you see a higher mountain, and you're like, oh, I got to climb down this one and start climbing that one now. And there's always the temptation to just say, well, I could just stop here. And so by the time I had gotten to uh, the school director job, I was just like working, trying to be the best school director I could be. And there was definitely a temptation to just stay there. And lots of people told me to just stay there. Um, of course, the interesting thing after the pandemic, the school that I worked for that seemed like such a stable job that no longer exists, right? They closed their doors.
Mm-hmm.
So what seemed like the safe kind of place ended up not being so safe.
Right.
But it would have been hard to imagine like a black swan event, a once in 100-year pandemic that was so mismanaged. But basically, um, to answer your question, I knew that like I could just eat awesome snacks and unlimited beef jerky and stuff, and sit in the developer bullpen and like hang out with intellectual cool people. Basically, like developers, most of them are really chill people, and I was like, okay, this is great. This is enough. I'm just going to stay here. But in the back of my mind, I was just thinking, like I rocked that school. Like we really helped a lot of students. We set up the teacher, like everybody's happy, right? And it was just like some guy like digging around on Google trying to like hack
Mm-hmm.
together, with duct tape and bubble gum, like these solutions. And I was thinking like maybe I could do more. Maybe I could do more. And if you're watching this, listening to this, you may be at a point in your life where like, hey, I'm doing pretty well. Ask yourself, could you be doing better? Maybe you can't. I don't know. Like for every like some people fly too close to the sun. Other people I think probably get way too comfortable and stop way before they reach their potential. And there is risk and reward in this world, right?
But you
If you
also have the new skill set as well, too, right? Compared to what it was before. You actually know how to code. You have some work experience. You could actually build something. You could deploy something, right? So maybe
yes,
you just had this power in your hand. You're like, I feel this responsibility to do something with it outside of this 9 to 5 job, possibly. I don't know. Am I putting words in your mouth?
Well, that is like the. I don't want to sound too pretentious, but yeah, like I did think like I have an obligation to like help people. Like I am a person of privilege, right? Like I was born with a U.S. passport. Uh, I went to university. My father went to university. His father went to university. His father immigrated from Sweden. Like just some farmer. But still, it's like I feel like there's been some momentum down the generational lines, and like, okay, what's this next generation going to do? How are we going to do better than the previous one? Like, how are we going to move things forward? And I just don't want to sound like too grand or anything like that, but yeah, like that's a huge part of it. Is I could just be comfortable. I could just have this comfortable life. And I'm lucky in the sense that like I have that option, right? Like if I were born 2000 years ago, I would be a farmer and I'd probably die at like 40, might not even get married. Most men like historically never even were able to get married and have kids and all that stuff. So like I just want to preface this with I take absolutely none of this for granted. And I think about this all the time and I'm grateful for my blessings. But though I've received much, and I feel like there's an opportunity to try to like turn around and like help other people. And I'm not a wealthy person. Philanthropy is not something I can do, but I am a teacher. Like that's my entire career, like the past 20 years, basically teaching. So I can teach, and maybe that's useful. So
Sounds like there was like a blend between you learning how to code and just getting some skill sets as a software developer, and then you're kind of leveraging your experience as a school director and kind of mixing those together. Maybe that was the genesis of why you, I don't know, opened up your terminal, started this package called FreeCodeCamp, and then like you don't probably didn't even know what you were going to be typing, but you started something, and then it just started evolving. So, like, how did that process go? Was it just a Saturday weekend? You just opened up your laptop and said, "Hey, let's see what I can build."
I figured it was just going to be another failed project. I'd had a lot of failed projects, and anybody who's built something of substance, there might be a few people who will get lucky right off the bat, but I know plenty of people who are in San Francisco who are very skilled, like smarter than I am, better at software engineering, probably better at like product discovery and like all the skills that really matter to an entrepreneur, fundraising, things like that, right? Like, and they're still trying to get traction with something, right? They're still trying to have like some sort of uh, get some sort of initial momentum. Um, so yeah, I just figured it was going to fail because I'd already built several educational tools that nobody cared about. Like,
Mhm.
but I learned a tremendous amount about coding by building like a course recommendation engine. For example, I had scraped millions of job postings, millions, and I had also scraped. I had built a database of like 36,000 free online courses and like open textbooks and stuff like that. And I figured out like a system to like recombine them into curricula based on what you wanted to learn and what skills were listed in your LinkedIn profile. It's an incredible amount of over engineering for something that like people would be like, oh, I'm not going to use this, spend thousands of hours learning this stuff that your algorithm just spat out within a few hundred milliseconds. Like that doesn't seem legit. Right. So like after building that and like, just overthinking things, I just stripped everything. Oh, okay. Instead of trying to teach every topic under the sun and just help people get wherever they want to go with their career, what if we just say, hey, we're just going to create a single linear curriculum and we're going to focus on basically just a few skills. And so I thought, what skill is the most valuable skill you can learn in 2014? Like hands down, JavaScript. JavaScript is like so much more useful than any other programming thing. Now, Python in 2022 arguably can be used for a lot of stuff, especially in scientific computing. But if you look in terms of like jobs, I think JavaScript is still the winner in terms of like what do startups use, what do big, companies like LinkedIn, Netflix, Walmart, like they all use Node.js. So I was like, well, I'll just do Node.js, and yeah, and so I strapped together some basic resources. I was like, hey, what's a good thing to follow Harvard CS50, which was the original way we have people learn about computer science concepts. And I was like, all right, well, let's use this. I think now no longer available JavaScript course from Stanford, and then like Stanford algorithms course, the database course, which is a very good course by the way. I think it might still be available. None that stuff hasn't fundamentally changed dramatically. I would use the FreeCodeCamp relational database certification that's now available instead. But if you want some more conceptual stuff, like learning about normal forms and stuff, like that's a really good course. Um,
Right. And I know that what it was originally maybe a side project or something that you wanted to do on your free time. But eventually, when did you start realizing that, hey, this is getting a lot of traction? A lot of people are coming into it. Uh, Maybe I should commit to this full time.
yeah. Well, my wife, who was working at the time, and that's how we had health insurance, which for those of you who are watching or listening from within the US, you're going to understand what I'm talking about. Like, we're an extremely prosperous country, but we don't have universal health care. I think we're the only like sufficient like country this advanced that doesn't have where people just go bankrupt all the time because of healthcare expenses. So we had health insurance. She had to work her job, and we were just living in this expensive San Francisco city. I was trying to like figure things out. So I had basically just at this point like I'm just going to explore and try to get something to stick. And if this doesn't work, then I'll eventually go back to teaching. Um, so I was fully focused on this. And so what would happen is we had this hip chat room, which hip chat is like an old chat room pre Slack, pre Discord. And so I'd hang out in there, and like anytime anybody joined, I'd be like, hey, tell me about yourself. Like, please stay, don't leave. And eventually I caught enough people in that web that would stick around and chat with me that other people would come and they'd see the conversation and like, oh, you two talk to each other. And like, so kind of like matchmaking and just trying to get any sort of traction I could where people would feel some affinity and ever navigate back. Like, if you can get more than like 1% of your website's visitors to actually come back a second time, that is a massive victory because
Hmm.
humans attention span is fleeting, their memories notoriously short, and so it's just like a huge struggle to get that initial traction. So when I actually got a few people coming back, that was when I knew, okay, we've got something. Because I never got anybody to come back to my previous project. They'd all be polite and then they'd peace out. But people are actually coming and completing the curriculum.
Right. And as I guess as people were finishing the curriculum, maybe you needed to have some kind of goal or outline defined to your students. Like, this is what I wanted you to get out of Free Code Camp. And I'll just give you a quote. It says, like, Free Code Camp is my effort to correct the extremely inefficient, circuitous way I learned to code. I'm committing my career and the rest of my life towards making this process as efficient and painless as possible. All those things that made learning to code a nightmare to me are the things that we were trying to fix with Free Code Camp. Uh, that was your goal, original goal for Free Code Camp. And
Yeah.
do you think that's evolved in any way?
I mean, we're covering a lot more math. We're going to be teaching English as a second language, English for developers, for people that like studied English in high school and college, but still don't feel their English is quite good enough to work at a multinational company or to pitch, English speaking investors or whatever. So, we're just gradually kind of expanding the scope of that, but it's all around technology education and everything. Like at the end of the day, all we care about is creating free learning resources. That's Free Code Camp's mission. We don't have some grand mission of like helping end developers get jobs in software engineering or, changing the world in some more abstract way. It's a very concrete goal of continually publishing free learning resources. Um, and I,
And what do you think about? I know you emphasize so much on this linear growth, right? Because there's just so much information out there, and it's really hard to prioritize these subject matters or languages. And I know you said JavaScript back then, and I still think JavaScript is still important now in 2022. But with all these, I know you mentioned English. I know you mentioned like the Free Code Camp is evolving in some aspects. Like, how do you ensure that the people that are using the platform, they're kind of making sure that they're following that course and not diverging, right? Because with Free Code Camp, it's free, but at the same time, it's hard to find those accountability partners to say, hey,
yeah.
wait, don't go there, don't go there, just stay here, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, we don't really like.
Hmm.
That's the thing is like my sentiment on this is there is no one stop shop. Anybody who's trying to like wall you into some ecosystem, I think is not necessarily your friend. Like tons of people use FreeCodeCamp, and they'll also, for example, go get like a master's degree from like Georgia Tech in computer science, which is a pretty good online program that's reasonably affordable. Or they'll be going to like Western Governors University and get a software engineering degree there, or they'll just be like, hey, I use FreeCodeCamp and I also use these other open source projects and things like that. And what we want to do is basically make FreeCodeCamp porous enough that people can easily come in and out, and people can come to their own conclusions. We're not going to tell you, hey, just stick to this linear curriculum. Like it's kind of like the movie Inception, right? Like the whole point of that entire grand effort of like doing all these nested dreams and all this stuff was just to convince this guy to break up his company, right? But he was not going to accept. Sorry, if this isn't actually a spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Inception, this is just like the first. This is kind of the exposition, though. But the whole notion of that movie is like if you could just say, "Hey, you should break up your company," and he'd be like, "Yeah, that's a good idea," then like they wouldn't need to do all that stuff. But the reality is, humans are inherently skeptical of anything that originates outside, but they will not reject an idea that originates within them. So if they think that this is an insight that is revealed to them through a dream or something like that, but it originally came from within themselves, they won't question it in the same way. So, like, I should break up my company. It's a very different thing. So, so to some extent, like we just want to be there, like, hey, we're here, we're here, we're here, and let people eventually come to the conclusion, like, gee, I should just be going through this. Why am I messing with all this other stuff? And the reality is maybe they should be messing with that other stuff too. There are so many amazing free learning resources out there and paid learning resources as well. But we want to give that to them to make the decision. Because what I would really be sad is if somebody thought like just do free code camp, it's everything you need to get a job. Like we could definitely revert to like hyperbole and probably convince some people to like just stick with us, do all this stuff. But long term, it's much better for us to just always be there, like the giving tree. I love that book when I was a kid. I don't know if you've read that book, but
Oh,
basically, the
I love
tree's
that
always
book.
there to
Yeah,
help the kid, whatever he needs.
exactly.
Ultimately, that spoiler alert that leads to the tree's demise. And I'm hoping it won't lead to the free code camp's demise. But the thing is, like free code camp, just think of free code camp as a giving tree with infinity wood, right? Infinity shade, infinity apples, right? Like because it really is. So the thing about software is it's infinitely reproducible, and the marginal costs associated with delivering that software plunge at scale. We have 80 servers, right? Like all of FreeCodeCamp is just 80 servers. And if you think about that, that's pretty remarkable that like right now there are about 4,000 or 5,000 people using FreeCodeCamp as you and I talk, and it's all just 80 servers, right? So if you think about it, like there's no reason to think that we couldn't have, instead of just, millions of users, billions of users, right? Like it would not scale linearly. We would not need 80,000 servers to serve a billion people. We'd probably need, several thousand, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so that is the beauty is that just a few kind souls who donate to $5 a month to free code, it's a small fraction of the people who use free code camp, but 8,000 people, right? So that does add up to be able to offset the cost of servers, and we get grants from companies like Google and stuff like that as well. So that kind of like helps us cover the gap in like our payroll and our servers and all that stuff. So I just want to emphasize that like we don't really have any incentive to keep people in the free code camp community. Like just using us, we're not going to pretend to be a one-stop shop. There's no reason to do that. We can just continue to provide free learning resources, and people who want to go like free code camp maximalist, that's fine. It doesn't really benefit us unless you like. Sometimes we have people that are so like bowled over by free code camp that they graduate and they're like, here, I'm going to give like $100,000 to free code camp. That does happen, and that's a huge windfall. Our long-term goal is to just continue to like we're always going to be free. I put that in the name so people wouldn't be able to like future leadership generations wouldn't be able to like renege on that value proposition. But for sustainability, our long-term goal is just to have a few, you know, prominent graduates, because if you have millions of people going through, some of those people are going to become like major employers within the private sector, or they're going to be able to get in other positions of authority where they can allocate funds back to you. And so that's
Right.
kind of our long-term goal, is just to have the most fortunate few subsidize everyone else so that it can continue to be free.
And I guess when you first started, it was very clear because the scope was so limited in the sense that you wanted to go from point A to point B. So the linear path was very clear. Would you say now that there are a little bit more resources out there and maybe more different paths, it's not just necessarily one linear path, but multitude of linear paths you can take through Free Code Camp in some regards?
Well, we plan to always keep it a single linear path, and we're actually in the process of transitioning FreeCodeCamp into a 4-year degree program, like a
Right.
free bachelor's in computer science, and that process will take potentially 10 or 15 years to get like full accreditation. We're starting the process with the fact that there are long bureaucratic cycles, and it's not bad bureaucracy, it's quality assurance, and I think it's very good that higher education generally moves slow because you want to be careful with these kinds of things, right? You don't want people graduating with degrees that are worthless. Right, so quality is everything. So uh, just like a university degree is basically like a major sheet and you work through the class, there might be some electives. We might have some electives. I have always thought electives were kind of a cop out by universities. Like, we can't decide what you should learn, so here, you figure it out. You're some starry eyed 18-year-old. You know what to do.
Just give us money.
Yeah, just give us money. Oh, and if it takes you an extra year to graduate because you like did a bunch of electives or changed majors, it's not our fault. Like, pay us. I've always thought that was kind of like a bad practice. If you go back to the original universities, even 100 years, like 100 years ago, the place where people had the highest educational attainment was in London, and it was about 1% of people had a university degree, right? And those people all went and studied liberal arts, and they all basically studied the same thing: Greek, Latin, mathematics, rhetoric, things like that. So everybody had this universal degree. And if you look at law school, everybody studies the same thing. Then they specialize on the job. Medical school, everybody learns the same thing. Then they specialize through residency programs. And I think that's probably true with a lot of other professions. Like, here's the canon of knowledge that you need, learn this, and then you're going to specialize on the job. And that's kind of the approach FreeCodeCamp would like to take. I don't want us to be like, there are some websites that just have like a smorgasbord, like an entire buffet, and you can just grab whatever you want, but you don't necessarily know what to grab, and that can cause some decision paralysis. If you present a single monolithic curriculum, it may feel like more constrained and less fun, but at least it's not confusing and nobody's wasting time.
I do want to rewind a little bit with I guess the Free Code Camp journey. I know when you first started, it was a lot of you just, hey, here's a free resource there. Hey, there's a free resource there. Hey, there's a free, like, Code Academy is there. You could link to this if you want to learn backend technologies and MongoDB. At what point did you realize like you had to take control of the curriculum more? Because that's a pretty big decision to go from one type of teaching to now you being responsible for the curriculum itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, I have a lot of admiration for Apple, for example, for Toyota, for a lot of these great companies that are very vertically integrated, and just they take quality really seriously, and they think about it harder than everybody else. They work harder than everybody else. If you are more passionate about something than you believe other people are, there's no reason you should delegate that to those people. You should do it yourself. And so I feel like the quality was not there with the other existing offerings. Like, MOOCs were great and all, watching a video and then like doing some degree of program, but it wasn't enough programming practice. And so and also the thing that alarmed me was a lot of these founders of early MOOC companies, like the founders of Coursera, the founders of Udacity, they would just like leave the company. I'm like, okay, did you really even care about higher education? Like, you've only been at the company for like 5 years and you're leaving, or 3 years. And it just left a better taste in my mouth, because I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be here. Like, I'm going to be here hopefully 50 years from now if I'm still alive. Like, this is my calling in life. And to see like these academics just kind of abandoning their projects and bringing in professional CEOs and stuff. I was just like, okay, help isn't coming. Like we're gonna have to save ourselves. That was kind of like the feeling there, uh, and I had like a really, I'm not trying to be boastful or anything, but having just built this project that, had like scraped 60, 36, 300, yeah, 36,000 courses and textbooks. And like, I'd gone through and like manually categorized a lot. Like, okay, this book covers this, and this book is like the most recommended for this topic. So I had this kind of encyclopedic knowledge of the resources, and I genuinely just didn't feel like the topics we needed to cover were covered sufficiently well. So people in the community started, like, I built the original HTML, CSS, and JavaScript projects, and people would jump on and like reiterate or like iterate on top of them and make them more granular. And we had a really great thing going. And so I was like, well, let's just do this. Let's just do everything first party.
Mm-hmm. And what was that process like? What kind of hurdles did you run into? Was it it sounds like, it sounds easy to say, oh wow, it was a success now, but I can only imagine that transition was pretty difficult starting from ground up.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm a big advocate of like work-life balance. I think everybody should try to like, work 40 hours a week if they can. I probably worked 120-hour weeks for like a year just on the curriculum, on all the other aspects. Like, we had tons of site outages, and I was doing all the DevOps, and I'm not a person who should be doing DevOps. We just had like so many, and I was doing most of this myself, and just like I would bring on people as the resources allowed. Like, hey, we need you to like help, improve this aspect of the curriculum or something like that. But really, for the first 2 years, it was almost completely just me doing stuff. And then like a whole bunch of people with expectations, and I was bad at managing expectations early on. So I'd be like, "Hey, the curriculum's almost done," and then we launched the curriculum, and it wouldn't be ready, and like it was just one unforced error after another. So it was incredibly stressful. And I was streaming on Twitch most of the time too. So like most of my failings were like very publicly aired on Twitch when I would like completely sleep deprived, like trying to like build curricula and like fix issues, and having people in chat like, "Hey, you forgot to do this," or "What's going on over here on this code?" I was like, "Oh, thank you. I like haven't slept, so I didn't notice that." It was a disaster, man. But I got through it, and the community got through it, and they didn't abandon FreeCodeCamp. There were a lot of growing pains. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I bet. And I know I would love to talk to you about your like philosophy on time and just that whole aspect of it, because it's so important, especially as a software developer. Sometimes, people always talk about burnout and all of those things, but I actually have a community question that someone wanted to ask. And he said, or she asked, would you have done anything differently? What maybe you wish you knew, and maybe the biggest hurdle to overcome in Free Code Camp?
Never announce anything until it's done.
When is it ever done, though?
Like,
when is it ever done?
well, until you're like, okay, this is like at least like a release candidate, right? This is something I could put out and we can iterate on it, but it's like that one, release. Do your alphas privately, do a closed beta if you can, and then even when it's live, keep it in beta for a while, just so people don't have the expectation, because people will arrive at FreeCodeCamp and they'll click a few things and they'll make a judgment like, this looks like crap. Why is the UX so janky? Or they'll say like, oh, this challenge didn't load. Like, oh, you've got a freaking ad blocker that's blocking JavaScript from executing on the page. But like, there's no way I can tell them that. They just leave thinking FreeCodeCamp is broken, right? So just lots of different little things that do user testing. Don't ever trust your instincts when it comes to trust your instincts as far as the big things, but as far as like sitting down and like observing people using it, like you can learn an incredible amount just doing hallway usability testings. I have probably so many things to say, but maybe you have some other questions.
What was the biggest hurdle that you had to overcome then, that you can remember?
Just my own crappy programming skills was a big one. Like, I'm not a good developer. I do everything I can. Like, I read the pragmatic programmer books. I spend a ton of time doing coding exercises. These days, I haven't had much time to do it. Like, you'll look at my GitHub history and see it just craters after like we hit like a certain number of team members, because I was spending more time administering and trying to keep the lights on with fundraising and stuff like that. Fundraising being like going out and getting grants and like figuring out ways to get people to give us money. Just to emphasize, FreeCodeCamp's a public charity and nobody owns any equity. I don't own any equity. Like if I left FreeCodeCamp tomorrow, I would have literally nothing to show for it except for my reputation.
I remember you made a blog and you were like, do people actually look this up? What is Quincy Larson's net worth or something?
I think if you go to Google, it might be like, if you type Quincy Larson, go on Google where it'll autocomplete and type Quincy Larson. I'm doing it right now. And it's the first thing that people look up. Quincy Larson net worth. Then they look up Quincy Larson email, Quincy Larson LinkedIn, Quincy Larson Twitter, Quincy Larson age, Quincy Larson wife. That's freaking super creepy. You all need to chill out.
Oh man, that's the I guess price you pay for somewhat celebrityness in the tech world or in just the world in general. But we live in the age of internet, right?
Yeah, I definitely don't fault people for wondering. Like people will say that's the most frequent question we always got historically. Like, how does FreeCodeCamp make money? Is this a scam? Like, why would it be free? Why wouldn't you charge money? Well, it turns out there are about 4 billion people around the world who don't have a credit card, who can't use your product if it's charged. Even if you charge $1, even if you charge nothing and just have a credit card gate your product. A lot of people won't sign up. One of the reasons that every page on FreeCodeCamp is accessible without signing in is because a lot of people don't trust, and they probably shouldn't trust, that their information isn't going to be tracked and sold and stuff like that. So you can use everything on FreeCodeCamp without even signing in. And if you do sign in, all we collect is an email address. That's it. We don't ask you for any sort of demographic information. We don't sell that data or do anything with it. When you go to the settings page and you scroll to the bottom, you say, delete all my data, we delete it instantaneously. And there's no backup of it. I mean, technically they're backups. We destroy those after like a week or something like that, right? It's just like an emergency backup.
Yeah, I want to switch gears a little bit and maybe talk about your just philosophy on time and effort. And I remember you saying that if you're trying to start anything, you should be working like crazy on it. Once you get momentum, it's good to relax. And I'm not saying that you want to give this blanket advice of hustle culture and all of that stuff, but what would you say for new developers, not necessarily just using FreeCodeCamp, but just trying to break into this industry as a software developer? Because in your personal experience, I could see that you went to 40 hackathons. You definitely put in the work to get to a certain point where you can potentially relax. But not even just your software developer journey, even with FreeCodeCamp, you said you went from like 120 hours to now like 45 hours, working 7 days a week, 6 hours a day or something like that.
Yeah.
What is your philosophy on time or like effort or just anything, any advice you would give to these new developers trying to really make a mark in this space?
I mean, if you're just trying to get a job as a software engineer, don't beat yourself up too much. I do think that you should be getting, like, first and foremost, if you're not sleeping 8 hours a night, you're not going to retain stuff. Like if you're in a learning process, when I was doing the 120 hours, that was me like trying to keep FreeCodeCamp from burning down. Right. That's different because I was kind of like tearing off pieces of myself and throwing it into the fire, to keep the fire going. That's kind of how you have to look at it when you have some sort of project that you're running. For an entrepreneur, I think it is, if you're an entrepreneur, don't let anybody work-life balance shame you. Like you should do whatever you need to do to keep that project going. If you are somebody working for somebody else, I would encourage you to just set limits and expectations. The biggest thing is not working too much. I think the biggest thing is like this notion of like always on. Like, hey, we're on Slack. I sent you a Slack message 15 minutes ago. What's going on? Like, here's what I tell our team. And we're up to 30 people now. So this is like a reasonably sized nonprofit, right? And before that, like, I think I was generally managing people like 25 people at the time. And I would always tell them, like, look, as long as you check your email once a day, you're good. Like, don't think that, like, if it's a catastrophe, don't worry. Like, we'll call you that the servers fell over or something like that, right? So like, I tell people, turn off all your notifications on your phone and just check your email once a day. Check your Twitter DMs once a day. Check if you use Slack, if you use, like, we have our own chat server. So I'm like, check the chat server once a day. And within 5 minutes, you can check. If there's nothing there, like, no big deal. Just keep going. Don't sweat it. Don't ever think that, like, people are waiting on you. try to stay at inbox zero would be my, I'm a big believer in inbox zero, and I try to hit it several times a week. Um, but the biggest thing is like live asynchronously, shift all the stuff to where you can do it asynchronously and it's okay. Calendly is a big windfall for me because like I'll just send people a Calendly link and I've got like 3 days where I have meetings. People can just book a time and I'll meet with them. And having those synchronous meetings is so much more valuable than hurling emails back and forth or Slack messages or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not in the camp that thinks like, oh, this meeting could have been an email. No, like an email would not capture the nuance and would not provide like the push and pull of an actual productive meeting. There's this quote that I love: weeks of coding can save you hours of meetings.
Definitely. And actually, when I heard that quote about if you're trying to start anything, you should be working like crazy on it, I personally just resonate that with my own personal career experience where getting into tech and trying to get your first job as a software developer was so hard. And especially when I saw your story about like the 40 hackathons and trying like trial by fire, building projects over and over again and getting a little embarrassed and humiliated because some things weren't going your way in front of other people. That is kind of the effort that you need to put in. But eventually, even for my own career, like after maybe 3.5, 4 years in the industry, I was able to just kind of relax, and I just always felt like I was underwater and could never breathe. But at that year 4 mark, I was able to finally just get up and just enjoy myself. And that whole idea of committing a lot of hours up front so you can relax a little bit later, I'm a huge believer of that. But I know that not everybody follows that same philosophy. But I truly believe that the upfront work can make your life so much easier near the end. But that's kind of how I interpreted originally. But I guess it may be some. I guess maybe for you, it's more specifically for like entrepreneurship and ownership. In my head, I was thinking ownership of my own career journey,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Yeah,
The thing to remember is this is hard.
this is
Nobody
hard.
said
Exactly.
software engineering was easy. If they told you software engineering was easy, I'm sorry, they're trying to sell you something, right? Like
Right.
programming is hard. It's frustrating. You're constantly being told by the compiler or the test suite, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. You have to acknowledge that it's hard and that anybody can do it if they're sufficiently motivated. But it's not for everybody, and a lot of people, it takes an indeterminate amount of time. Some people are just going to naturally have a knack for it, but that doesn't mean that you can't be better at them if you work harder, right? The tortoise passes the hare. I've
Hmm.
passed many hares along the way as a tortoise.
Right. So with this new change, I know you went from 120 to possibly like 45 hours, you said, and you love it because it's more time that you get to spend with your family, your daughter, like taking her to school. And I think you also described like, yeah, I could go to travel somewhere and all that sounds fun and all, but to me, like family is more important. Like what originally was so hyper focused on free code camp, and not saying that you're not a big advocate of free code camp because I
Yeah.
know you are. Like how is your kind of balance changed a little bit
Oh man.
now that you're kind of going from there to now?
Well, thank you for indulging me and giving me an opportunity to talk. I mean, I've been talking about myself the whole time, but like free cookie, I view it as my baby. Like so,
Right.
but I do have a second. I have two other kids that are age 6 and 4, and I love them even more than I love free code camp. But I have really just enjoyed like reading and going for long walks, usually late at night, so I don't have to wear sunscreen, and playing musical instruments, man. Like since the pandemic started, I was like, I think I beat like the game Doom 2016. I beat it with just a pistol on nightmare difficulty. I was like, yeah, and then like that thrill wore off, and I was like, oh, but nobody cares. Like I almost beat Dark Souls 3 without leveling once, like being a one bro, as they were called. And I was like, this is really hard, but there's nothing that like it's just bragging rights, right? Like if I make music, I can actually potentially entertain people or give them something to listen to in the
Hmm.
background while they code. So that's what, like I got really into hip hop and jazz, and so I've just been basically making beats as they call them. Like I learned how to use a digital audio workstation. I learned how to play the drums. So I just basically play bass and drums and
Nice.
keyboard, and I suck at guitar, but I'm trying to get better at that so I can do some jazz chords and stuff. But yeah, man, like that's it. Like hanging with the kids, going for walks, listening to audiobooks, listening to audio lectures, reading, and then I spend like 3 or 4 hours a day just making noise on these things.
Nice, nice. And maybe just my last question is 2022, Quincy Larson, like what is your definition of success specific for your journey?
Yeah. I mean, like keep in mind, like I'm in a position of relative privilege. Like I can basically just sit down and work on interesting parts within FreeCodeCamp, and um, my definition of success, if we can expand the resources, like if we can ship the data science curriculum, we're going to ship part of it. It's a massive undertaking, but if we can ship that, if we can get some foothold with the English for developers and some of these other projects we're working on, I don't have any goals. This is a piece of unsolicited advice. Don't invest yourself in metrics that you can't directly control. Don't say like, I want to get, N thousand visitors to my site, or I want to get N thousand views on my YouTube channel this month or something like that, because you're going to find that you're mostly powerless to algorithms. But what you can do is like I'm going to create N videos, or I'm going to create N tutorials. Like I've written more than 500 programming tutorials over the last few years, and I'm very proud of that. I'm much prouder of that than the fact that like they get N views or whatever, right? Because I can't control
Right.
that. Like I'm glad that they're helpful, but like the process of writing it, that was something that I had direct. I could research, I could write, get feedback on, I could improve. That like just focus on the work. And so for me, it's like, can we build this data science curriculum?
Mm,
Can we get a university to accept some of FreeCodeCamp as college credit? Those are first steps toward much larger endeavors, and that's what I hope for 2022.
got it. Actually, I know I said last question, but I have a really easy one for you to answer. It's
Sure.
what's your next project gonna be?
There is no next project in terms of like
I knew it.
FreeCodeCamp is like, I mean, this may sound ridiculous because like once you're lucky, twice you're good, but like I genuinely believe like I'm just super duper lucky, and I have lots of friends who never had successful projects. Again, they're toiling in San Francisco, or they're toiling in Bengaluru, or Beijing, or wherever, right? Like, and they're just like trying, they're hustling, they're working very hard, and they're probably shaving years off their lives trying to get this to work. And you know what? I'm one of the lucky few who got a break, really, right? Like, and if I weren't in San Francisco, if I weren't, some white male who had like several generations, like 2 generations of college graduates before me, if I didn't have all these stars aligned to put me in the position to where I could, like, those all dramatically increased my likelihood. Like when I was born, I rolled really high, right? And I can't deny that, but I know plenty of other people who have similar privilege and similar circumstance, and maybe even degrees from prestigious universities, which I don't have. I just went to a cheap state school, but they're still struggling to get traction. So I know that this is probably my big break, and that like if I were to like leave this behind and say, oh, I'm going to go do an even more ambitious project, it would probably fail, and I would always regret having left this. So
Right.
that like there's this expression, one in the hand is worth two in the bush. It's a common kind of English idiom. One in the hand is worth 10,000 in the bush. Like, because most people never get one in the hand.
Hmm. Yeah, actually, I thought I was giving you an alley oop because I remember I think I found you say that if I move on to a next project, this one has failed. And that's another way to think about it. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Like, did you actually finish? Did you go to the finish line? Like, is Free Code Camp 100% complete? And maybe it'll never be complete because it's a lifelong journey. But in your eyes, moving to that next project may not be the right move because in your eyes, it's not done.
Just to put this in context, the printing press was invented about 500 years ago. We still have illiteracy. The
Fair.
cloud computing was invented maybe like 15 years ago. Uh, like TensorFlow and like neural network. stuff, non-relational databases. Like these things were invented relatively recently, and people don't know how to use them yet. Like I think it's foolhardy to think that in my lifetime, or perhaps even in my kid's lifetime, we'll have the level of penetration of technology know-how that we need. I mean, obviously, we all want a future where everybody's a programmer, where you just walk up to a computer, just like in Star Trek, and you say, like, "Hey, cross-reference, the position of these, planets with like all the ships that have come through here in the past 30 years." Like it would be
Right.
really cool if that was programming and it was that declarative, and anybody could do it, and we have just this enlightened, powerful civilization that can leverage technology. But the reality is, most people have no idea how to use technology. Maybe they have an Android phone. There are billions of people who have an Android phone, and they have this supercomputer in their pocket that, like, if you could send it back in time, even 10 years would be revolutionary. And they don't necessarily know how to use it. Let's show them how to use it. That's going to be
Right.
a multi-generational endeavor.
Right. Well, Quincy, thank you for your time. And before I close out, I mean, is there any last words of advice, or do you want to talk about FreeCodeCamp? Any plugs?
No, man.
Feel free. The floor
I'm
is
just so grateful. If you're watching this and you've watched this far, you should totally subscribe to Tech Rally. I've been subscribed for I think like at least 8 or 10 months. You've been putting out some really good stuff, man. So
really appreciate it.
yeah, like my closing wisdom is like, check out this channel, and there are tons of other really great YouTube creators as well. But I think Alex is one of the few who has the credentials. Like he can talk with authority on these things. So you're hearing it straight from somebody who's authoritative and knows what they're talking about.
Really appreciate the stamp of approval, and I'll definitely send you that Venmo in the back channels for that nice little shout out. But really, Quincy, thank you for your time, and hopefully a lot of people that have stayed till the end really learned a lot, not just about how to get into tech, but just hearing about your story and what you went through and your philosophy behind FreeCodeCamp, philosophy on work and time. Just maybe they could take some notes and change something with their own journey to kind of get to that next level as well. So really appreciate you, spending an hour with me. And yeah, for all of you that are listening, I'll see you in the next episode. Bye. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment to show support. This episode will be available on YouTube and various other podcast platforms. Tech Rally out.